Hello and welcome back to Talent Magnet. This is Doug Foresta. Today with me, we have a special guest. Parfait Bachelet is with us, and we're going to be talking about inclusion, creating an inclusive workplace, among other things. Parfait, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Doug, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. So before we get into this, I do want to make sure that our audience understands why you're here and and a little bit about your background. So could you share a little bit about the work that you do, especially as it relates to workforce belonging and inclusion?
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, I am a culture and belonging strategist. I'm also a singer-songwriter. And what I'm really passionate about is really helping organizations and leaders have an imagination for what it could be like to befriend the other. And then after that imagination, I guess, is planted, really helping them with the tools, the strategies, and the coaching to foster that type of environment so that everybody can thrive. And so the way I've been doing that is really through trainings, through coaching, capacity building, strategic planning to help foster workplaces of belonging for all.
Parfait, you and I had a chance to chat a little bit before
Mhm.
the episode. And, one of the things that you pointed out, which I think is very insightful, is that the workplace is really one of the last kind of integrated spaces for most of us in our lives, right? Many of us tend to spend time with people that look like us, that sound like us,
Yeah.
that think like us. Can you say a little bit about, why is it so important to talk about belonging at work, especially in today's cultural climate?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, it's something that really struck me as well because when we think about it, right, when we think about our neighborhoods, because of economics and class, neighborhoods are primarily segregated, right? And then when you think about our places of worship, and they're segregated also by race, where folks are just, worshiping with people who look like them. And then when we think about our friends groups, we tend to hang out with the people who looks like us, think like us, or we've been around. And you think about even schools, right? Because of the way funding is done through home, taxes on properties and so forth. Our schools are also very segregated in terms of who we end up going to school with. So when you look at the lay of the land, there's just a socialization pattern through which we end up just being around those who are like us and think like us. And so it doesn't, there's not a lot of those spaces where we rub shoulders with those who are from a different life story than ours. And so the workplace become really what I would argue the last place where that integration can happen and has been happening as people are hiring people from different walks of lives. And so then we find ourselves in a workspace where we are interacting with people who had total different experiences and potentially values and than ours. And so how do we navigate that? How do we then ensure that um, we do it in a way that um, everybody thrives and the business thrives, right? It becomes an imperative to figure that out. Um, in a necessity, I would argue. Otherwise, the business suffers and the individuals who are in the workplace suffer, right? And there's a lot of time that is spent in the workplace with our coworkers, with our employers, that if we don't figure that out, how we foster a culture of inclusivity and belonging, then we are doing ourselves a disservice. I'm going to throw a little number at you for this fact here. The American Immigration Council did a pretty thorough study, and they repeated it in 2023 and 2024. And what they found out, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, and what have you, the American workplace, so the worker in the American workplace, 64% of folks don't feel a sense of belonging within their workplace. Right? That's an astounding number. An additional 74% of people felt a sense of non-belonging in their local communities, right? In their neighborhoods. And then an astounding 68% of people felt like they don't belong in the nation, period. Right? So 64% in the workplace, 74% in the neighborhoods, and 68% in the nation. And so if there's an area of opportunity, I would argue it's in the workplace because then there's people from all walks of life. So if we intentionally engineer and design those spaces to foster belonging, we can actually make a difference to these numbers.
Yeah, it's very powerful. You know, another thing that you had mentioned, and which I think was really interesting, is there are many approaches to to inclusion and belonging in the workplace, but you specifically talk about and write about this idea of befriending as a
Yeah.
concept for creating more inclusion and belonging in the workplace. Can you say a little bit more about, what does that mean? What is befriending, and what would that look like in practice?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's an interesting thing because over the years, this notion of even thinking about the professional spaces and using terms like friendship feels almost like a cognitive dissonance, right? People will be like, "What are you talking about? I have coworkers. I don't want to have friends at work." But the reality is this: is that we all have an imagination for what a friend is, right? We've all um, have a friend at some point or seen people who have friends. And simply put, a friend is someone um, who sees us, right? A friend is someone who's supportive of us, who cares about us. A friend who's someone with whom we can be honest and can be honest with us because they have our best interest in mind, right? And a friend is someone with whom we essentially grow. We become a better version of ourselves, right? And so I was really fascinated by that notion, and I'm a word nerd when I started really studying the root word of the term friendship and befriending. And it was fascinating to learn that the origin of the word is this old English word called frion and friogan, which are the same root words that give us the words to free and to set free. And it was mind-boggling to me, this idea that within the construct of friendship and befriending, inherently there's this idea of liberation, right? Being liberated from the confine of what we've known or who we have been, right? Who we are. So it's this idea that yes, we all have what I call tribal identities by virtue of our lived stories, right? And while those things are true and have shaped who we are and the way we see the world, they in and of themselves, they're not all encompassing of what could be. And so the notion of befriending across our tribal identities, there's a liberating element in there that unleashes potential, unleashes creativity and possibility. And so as I think about how we do belonging and inclusivity work in an optimal way, I think it's important for us to reclaim the meaning of friendship and befriending as a modality that can allow us to see the other as a potential friend who we can encourage, who we can see, who we can support, right? So that they can reach their potential and vice versa, right? So it's this idea that befriending liberates both the befriender and the befriended, right? And so I'm really passionate about that because I think, as we all know, in the current cultural climate we're in, there's been a lot of misgivings around DI work, right? And I think it's a tricky conversation because the challenge with DI is that it's being such an open-ended um, process that many people have given it different and their own meanings, if you will, right? And so that has made it very vulnerable to it being co-opted and also mischaracterized in many ways. But one of the main misgivings that I think a lot of people have felt around DI is this idea that it's kind of a mandate. It's something you have to do, and this idea of obligation um, and I think in that dynamic, and you can also hear from that some of the terminologies and words that have been used historically are things like an ally, right, and an accomplice, right? So there's still this idea of us versus them, which I think does not call the aspirational um, voice in us towards what can be in terms of a larger community of belonging and friends, right? And so I think that's where there's this opportunity with the befriending framework to it's not us versus them, it's not you against me, it's how do we explore how we can be friends to one another so that you can be liberated and thrive. I can be liberated and thrive for the benefit of our businesses and our communities.
So for businesses that, you know, I'm a business owner, I'm listening to this and I say, you know what, Parfait, you are spot on. This
Yep.
is, I get it. I understand why we need to do this. Can you give some tips and maybe even some missteps to avoid when trying to move in this direction of more belonging, more inclusion?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Right. It's this idea, bring it down, Parfait, bring it down to the practical to us. What does it look like? What does it mean? I think it's important to emphasize that, oftentimes we like, outline 5 steps to this and that, right? Which are really helpful. But when we go back to this idea of befriending, and even at the interpersonal level, we must acknowledge the fact that it's an art form, right? There's something creative around the very act of befriending. So there's room there for people to be really creative in how they want to go about it. So I want to start there. Number two, the very act of befriending is a commitment, right? They cannot be befriending a long haul without a sense of I'm committed to this. I'm committing to to this engagement. So an element of commitment, which usually is driven by values, organizational values. I would invite organizations and leaders to think about what are your organizational values that will be a bedrock to this idea of fostering a culture of befriending within your workplace. And then number three, I will also say it's an incremental process, right? You cannot change your culture overnight. So there's going to be some critical levers that you're going to tweak over a period of time that will bring about that such an outcome. So I will start there. And then I will get very specific with 3 key pillars that I think when leaders are intentional about those things, they can bring about this culture of befriending and belonging. One is, to which extent do you foster what I call psychological safety, right, in your workplace as a leader and between peers? And what I mean by that, how do people feel, right? Or let me rephrase it. How safe do they feel learning in your organization, right? Is that a culture where people can learn safely without being ridiculed, put down, shamed, and the list goes on? Number two, as it relates to psychological safety, how much people can contribute to their ideas in a way that will make them feel like it's valued, it's wanted, right? And so being intentional about that. And then lastly, to which extent people feel like they can challenge the status quo or challenge authority. Again, oftentimes some folks will hear me say this. They're like, well, Parfait, you're all about anarchy. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about transparency and clarity for people to know what are the mechanisms through which they can challenge ideas and contribute in a meaningful way, because it's hard for us to feel like we matter and that we belong somewhere if we don't feel psychologically safe to learn, contribute, and challenge. Then, so that's the first lever. Second lever, I would say for leaders, think about how you do social connection. It cannot be something that you leave like haphazardly, that it may happen. You have to be intentional about designing opportunities for social connection between you and your reports and between employees. And there's a lot of strategies that can be put in place from the very onboarding stage when someone comes on board, all throughout. Social connection, it's key. Um, and then social connection, again, we can put a magnifying glass and look at how social connection can be done, right? There's some elements of social connections that come outwardly, they're visible, they're obvious, right? Oh, there's other women in this workplace like me, so I can relate. There's other people who I don't know, who are black and brown, right? So because our brains are such that we look for someone or something that looks like us that we can relate to. It's no guarantee that we might connect, but it's the first clue to say, oh, maybe there's a point of connection there. Now, beyond that visual representation, am I intentional about creating opportunities where the stories that have shaped who I am and who you are can come out? Hey, you served in the military. Oh my gosh, I served too. Oh my goodness, right? Let's talk about that experience. That's an opportunity for connection right there, right? And so those opportunities can be designed, engineered so that that happens. And then last but not least, connection can happen in a workplace when we are intentional about creating shared experiences, right? Think about people who've played sports together, right? There's this saying about neurons that fire together wire together, right? So it's being intentional about playing games, figuring out experiences where people can really connect and build that connection. Third but not least, lever is this notion of support and care. To which extent people feel supported and cared under your leadership, right? Do they have, well, let me the worst case scenario is that they don't even get help when they ask for it, right? So just figure it out. You're on your own. Is that type of culture? Or is that the place where people only get help when they are provided, when they ask for it, right? Which is good. It's better than not giving the help, but it's still not what could be. But is your workplace the place where help is actually anticipated, all right? Is there an anticipation for what people might need and what kind of care they will need? And if you are operating at that level, you are further along with creating that culture of belonging and flourishing and befriending, because there's nothing like, right? We've experienced this at the interpersonal level where you're like, wow, you thought of that. You anticipated my need, right? There's a greater sense of, oh, wow, that's the place where I feel at home, right? And then I think the last lever here is agency. Agency is a fancy word for to which extent people have a say in shaping their experience under your leadership, right? Are things just told to them to do as you're told, top down? Again, don't get me wrong, I'm not against hierarchy. I think organizational structure is important, but it's important for people to know the things that they can influence and how they can go about influencing things and feel like they're not just a a pawn in the whole thing. So those are the four levers I would say for leaders. If you were tracking psychological safety, um, support and care, connection, and agency, and the strategies that can be built around that, and the compounding effect of all of that can lead to that greater experience of belonging.
That's great. Thank you so much. I would be remiss before we sign off if I didn't ask you about. We've been talking about befriending, and I know that you have a book coming out called The Way of Friendship. Talk a little bit about what listeners can expect from the book, how it reflects your broader vision, and also tell us like when it's coming out and how we can get
Yeah, no,
it.
totally, totally. Thank you. I'm really excited about this opportunity to share with a wider audience this work that I've been doing for the last 25 years across a wide range of industries and organizations. And so, really, what folks can expect from the book is some stories of um, work I've done with organizations, works that I've done with people, and so memoir type stories to really inspire people and paint that picture of possibility of what is possible. And then there will be tools and strategies, just like I just listed off, in terms of things that folks can do as leaders in their organizations in order to foster that culture, and also tools. Self-reflective tools for individuals at a personal level, because I really believe that um, I have this saying, this quote, that systems change when hearts change, and hearts change when one dares to be a friend. Right? I really deeply believe that as individually we grow in doing friendship better with one another, with
It's
people who
beautiful.
are different from us, then we start shaping our systems, our procedures, our the ways we do business, pretty much. And then I really believe in a ripple effect all across. So that's what's going to be in the book. It's coming spring 2026, so about a year from now, roughly. So I'm deep into the editorial process and working with the publishing house with all the pieces that have to go behind such a launch. So yeah, really excited about it.
Thank you. And then one last final question. If people want to learn more about you and the work that you do, where should we send them?
Absolutely. So my website, parfaitbasile.com, has all the information you need to get a hold of me as it relates to the work that I do or the music that I do or the upcoming book. And I would love to be a support to any organization who's really trying to foster that type of culture that I think we're bound to head towards as the world evolves and craving a deeper sense of belonging for all of us.
Parfait, thank you so much for coming on Talent Magnet and sharing your words of wisdom with us on this important topic. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you for the opportunity, Doug.
Thank you.